Hello and welcome to Little Elizabeth Bakes Breakfast Bars. This is a recipe I developed based on my love for coffee cake or muffins or scones or anything that goes quite well with coffee. Now, there's nothing wrong with muffins. They can be healthy or not, but they're a little too fussy for me. You just have to scoop the batter into each of the individual cups, and then you have to wash out the individual cups unless you use a muffin liner. But then a sheet pan with the breakfast bars recipe allows for quick, efficient cooking and then also cleanup. So this recipe is about efficiency as much as it is about taste and nutrition. Speaking of nutrition, I will say that I'm not going to claim that these breakfast bars are health food, because they aren't. But they do have more protein than the Quaker granola bars, whereas those have 1 gram per bar, mine have 6 or 7 grams per bar. Now, what does this have to do with oatmeal? Why do I have it out against oatmeal? What traumas have I sustained? Well, my breakfast bars don't take quite as much time as you might think to bake. It's quite comparable to making a pot of oatmeal because it takes so long for oatmeal to cool, and the breakfast bars cool down really quickly. So that's another reason I love breakfast bars as opposed to oatmeal, and it makes so much more sense for me. Anyway, breakfast bars are enjoyed by all my kids, and they're significantly easier to clean up. Additionally, no bowls or even plates are needed. Serve with milk or coffee in my case, and you're set for a morning without the feeling of breakfast having robbed you of your zest for life. On to the recipe. So this recipe is not exact. We're just going to throw it together and hope for the best. Alright, so we're going to start with half a cup of oil. And there are some substitutions that you can use for the oil. So you could use half a cup of applesauce, you could use half a cup of ripe bananas. There are actually other things you can use as well, but I like, if I were to substitute, I would use applesauce or banana, because then you can reduce the sugar a little bit. Alright, next we're going to add the sugar. So we're going to do oil, eggs, and sugar in the same bowl initially. Add the vanilla in, mix it together, and then we'll do the dry ingredients. So we have the oil, we're going to do sugar. 3/4 of a cup of white sugar. And I'm not being exact. It's okay to do a little more, a little less. I think the current recipe is just the right amount of sweetness for my family, but maybe your family doesn't require that much sweetness. Maybe you can reduce it, I don't know. And again, if you add fruit, whether it be blueberries or raisins, you can add fruit and then you can reduce the sugar even more. So we have the oil and sugar, now I'm going to do a little vanilla and then the eggs. Alright, so we have the eggs and the oil and the sugar and the vanilla in there. Mix them together. Gotta get those eggs broken up, that's all. Alright, just a reminder, with this recipe, you don't have to be exact. You could add an extra egg, you could take egg away. The reason I like to use 4 eggs for this recipe is it helps with the structure of the breakfast bars. So the more eggs you have, the more it'll hold together nicely and it won't be so crumbly. The protein in the eggs helps things stick together easier, making it easy to clean up. The recipe total, there's 1.5 cups of oats, but for the batter part, you just add 1 cup. And oats in a recipe like this, they'll soak up pretty much as much of the wet ingredients as possible. So you will have to add more milk in this case than you would normally need to add to any coffee cake recipe because there's oats in here. Another ingredient, you could add more. This is another one, just so easy. Just add more if you want to, add a little more milk. It'll make it more healthy if you add more oats. But again, this is the ratio that I like. 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour. You could use whole wheat flour. And you could mix the dry ingredients together separately, but I'm going to just put them in the bowl. I haven't had a problem with that method, but just make sure that if you're using, whether it be baking soda or baking powder, you have to make sure that there's no big lumps in there. So with that said, I'm going to be using baking soda because the baking powder I have right now is kind of old. So I'm going to see, what do I have written here? I did this recipe yesterday and I just was confirming that the ratios were correct. So 3/4 teaspoon, though you could do a little more or less. I'm just cautious with baking soda because it has the tendency to make things taste salty if you add too much, obviously. So 3/4 teaspoon is enough, but you could just estimate really. And 1 teaspoon of salt. So we have dry ingredients in there. I just put them in and I'm just going to mix them in. And I'm not going to over mix it. I'm just going to make sure everything's incorporated. I don't know if it matters too much. I haven't experimented yet with if you mix it more, will it be different texture? Alton Brown probably knows. I don't. But so I added the dry ingredients into the oil and eggs and sugar and stuff. And it looks like it's really not ready to bake. It needs more moisture. I don't know if you can see. So now it's time for the milk. So because I use baking soda, I have to add an acid element into the recipe because with baking powder, the active ingredient is built in. So it's basically baking soda with the active ingredient built in. So if I'm just using baking soda, I have to add that active ingredient, which is acid, which is vinegar. And so I'm going to grab that and the milk.
We'll be using 1.5 cups of milk. By adding a splash of vinegar to the milk, I'll give it similar properties to a buttermilk. You could use real buttermilk, or you could just add lemon juice or vinegar to real milk or normal milk, and it'll act the same way. Gradually add the milk into the bowl. What I normally do is alternate the milk with the dry ingredients, but this works just as well. It's going to look too sloshy at first, but just give it a few minutes. The oats will soak in a lot of that moisture and it will look perfectly fine in just a couple minutes. Now you can add in whatever at this point. Today we're doing cinnamon topping, but you can add blueberries or raisins or chocolate chips. You could do a peanut butter chocolate chip version by adding 1/3 or 1/2 cup of peanut butter in at the oil and sugar stage and just reduce that oil and sugar a little bit. Make it your own, there's lots of potential. So I've mentioned the sheet pan, the cookie sheet. I use my largest pan but it's only slightly larger in surface area from my other ones. So yours, whatever you have, will probably work as long as it has an edge on it to contain the batter. And now we're gonna grease the pan. I'm not in the habit of buying cooking spray, so I have a really great kitchen hack from one of my good friends. She keeps her butter wrappers in the fridge in a bag, so whenever she needs to grease a pan, she gets one out and uses that. And if you need a little more butter to grease it, just grab a little more from your butter dish and use the wrapper to keep spreading it on, and it works perfectly fine. And I love how efficient it is. All right, now I'm gonna pour the batter and spread it evenly. But I'm still going to use this bowl. We're not going to wash it. I need to use it for the streusel topping. No one wants to be bothered to clean a second bowl when they don't have to. So to the bowl, I'll add a half stick of soft butter. And then pack into a 1/3 cup measure some brown sugar. Dump that in. And 1 tablespoon of cinnamon. You can be very generous with the cinnamon. A 1/2 cup of oats, a 1/2 cup of flour. And I don't always do this, but today I'll add a 1/4 cup of crushed almonds to the topping for more protein. Most of us in my home really don't enjoy nuts, but if they're finely chopped, I think I'll get away with it. Now to mix them together. You can scrape the sides of the bowl down if needed, if anything's stuck, but the streusel should look crumbly, but it's not supposed to be all fine crumbs, so it's good to have a variety of different crumbs in there. It will look delicious. Sprinkle the topping onto the batter as evenly as you can, but you're going to swirl it in anyway. So try to swirl it in and smush it into the batter. What I try to do is avoid too many crumbs, so I kind of smush the streusel into the batter to avoid that, because streusel, while delicious, is a bit messy. So just try to embed it in the batter. My oven has been preheated to 375 already. That's Fahrenheit. And it'll only be in there for 20 minutes and then it'll be done. But if you want it more golden brown, you can just leave it in for 25 minutes. And it's up to you. But I just usually do 20 minutes and it keeps a lot of the moisture in there. It's a little bit drier if you leave it in longer, obviously. But then it only takes 5 minutes to cool down on a rack, and I cut them into bars, about 20 or 24 pieces depending on what I want to do. They taste best fresh, but my kids have been known to eat them leftover as snacks and for breakfast the next day or the next day. It'll be fine. Enjoy.